And my prayer is, Lord, help me. Lord, help us. And help us to be thankful and grateful and say thanks to you and come back and outline to you all the blessings that your mercies has allowed us to do. I pray that prayer because I left my notes at home. I left my phone at home. I left my driver's license at home. I changed vehicles because the next one broke down yesterday. So that in transferring and so forth, I think I rested right outside. Earlier, I had circulated to persons that I think it might be a good idea to look at the sabbatical year, the land rest every 7th year, and also the jubilee year. Every 50th year, you have a jubilee. And I gave some references for people to read before. Leviticus 25 is the chapter that speaks to both of them, but from 24, 25, 26 to the end of Leviticus, they have issues that might be relevant. I'm hoping persons would have read, and the question was, what can we learn from the sabbatical year, the 70-year land rest? What can we learn from the 50-year jubilee? Okay? Just in case you didn't get to do that homework, I'd invite Frank to put Leviticus 25 on the screen, Leviticus 25, and we would read it together, the first part of it, because the first, I think 15 verses or so, set up for us the sabbatical rest, the land rest, and then shortly after, the 50-year jubilee. So I'd read that just in case we didn't read, and if you read it, this would be the refresher to bring things to mind, because each one of us will get an opportunity to say, what can we learn from this part of the Bible? We know that all the words in the Bible are there for our instruction, all the numbers counting up different things, all the genealogy. Sometimes you wonder, why this genealogy again? I just read that. Come back, they repeat the same thing again. What is the purpose of this? We skip over that because you hear this prince brought his set of things, prince number 1, then prince number 2, and they repeat all the items again, prince number 3, all the items again. And sometimes we kind of slip over it, okay, and go through. But I think all the words are just as inspired as each other, and they are there to help us. And what we are trying to do is to figure out how can this help us here and now, at this location, in this island, at this time, etc. And during my review, because for several weeks I've been going through the Torah, the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, and I've been stuck on these last few chapters in Leviticus for some time now, going back over it, etc. So when Sister Allison asked me about the presentation and that we didn't have the quarterly, etc., I said, okay, let me get some more minds to think about this thing that I've been thinking about to see if I'll come away from it a little more enlightened. So I have that motivation in terms of dealing with it in our discussions. And in looking at it, I recognize that Pope Francis and the Catholic Church since the 1300 have been having a jubilee every 25 years. And that in May last year, Pope Francis announced the jubilee would be this year, and is a jubilee of hope. I would recommend that you read that sometime, because this ministry is Glorious Hope Ministry. And in looking at the text, he noted that a lot of people don't have any hope at this time. And the children of God need to do things to bring hope to persons, hope to those in prison, hope to the young, hope to the old, hope to those who are displaced, hope to those who are in war zones and fighting, and a whole list of persons. I found it interesting, and I said maybe Glorious Hope Ministry might learn something from that in terms of the glorious hope and how other persons can embrace it and how they can live lives that cause people to be in hope. I also, my brother in my interactions, usually every Saturday morning, my sister, my brother, and I, and our respective spouses, and persons who are interested in our family, we interact and look at God's blessings for the week and the Rhema words and what we have been studying, and we look at it. And he was telling me that the Talmud in the Jewish system was some of the traditions of men, that the Jewish religion has been around for a long time. The only one that rivals it in terms of being present for more than 1,000 years would be the Catholic tradition. And in those traditions, they have had many hundreds of years to reflect. They have persons who dedicate themselves just to this alone, right? And they would write and think and come up with a lot of ideas. And in the Jewish Talmud, the rabbis over the years would have added and documented, expounded, etc., on different things. So in my preparation, I try to look and see how they treated with the sabbatical rest and how they treated with the 50-year Jubilee. And that provided some insights to me as well. Because one of the first things was how you count it, You count 7 years, and then 7 times 7 years bring you to 49 years, and then the year after is a Jubilee. Then in my mind I was saying, okay, so is the Jubilee the same as the first year in the next set of 7 years? And they would have resolved that issue because the starting point seemed to be 50 years, then you start a cycle of another 7 times 7 years, and then another Jubilee. Okay, so Leviticus 25:1. We would look at that and read together. And the Lord spake unto Moses in Mount Sinai, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, When ye come into the land which I give you, then shall the land keep a Sabbath unto the Lord. 6 years thou shalt sow thy field, and 6 years thou shalt prune thy vineyard, and gather in the fruit thereof. But in the 7th year shall be a Sabbath of rest unto the land, a Sabbath for the Lord. Thou shalt neither sow thy field nor prune thy vineyard. That which groweth of its own accord of thy harvest thou shalt not reap, neither gather the grapes of thy vine undressed, for it is a year of rest unto the land. And the Sabbath of the land shall be meat for you, for thee, and for thy servant, and for thy maid, and for thy hired servant, and for thy stranger that sojourneth with thee, and for thy cattle, and for the beasts that are in thy land, shall all the increase thereof be meat. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years. And the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month. In the day of atonement shall ye make the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. A jubilee shall that 50th year be unto you. Ye shall not sow, neither reap that which groweth of itself in it, nor gather the grapes in it of thy vine undressed. For it is the Jubilee. It shall be holy unto you. Ye shall eat the increase thereof out of the field. In the year of this Jubilee ye shall return every man unto his possession. Okay, I would leave it there up to verse 13. Thank you. Okay, so that is the context we are looking at. So first of all, we look at the 7-year land rest. In Genesis, the occupation that God gave human beings was to dress and to keep the garden. The agricultural-based occupation is the healthiest and best occupation that there is. And even today, some persons enjoy that activity in terms of whether it's playing with the soil, putting your hand in the dirt, We call it soil rather than dirt, but to play in the soil and also to walk up and down in it. Some people say if you put your foot on it, just as on the sand and the sea, it's therapeutic. And it brings you in oneness with the rest of creation. And that's why it's such a powerful occupation. As well as in terms of science, it includes all the sciences. It includes the meteorology and the climate situation. It includes the geology and the soil system and soil structure. It includes the biology, right? Both of plants and both of animals. I don't think they have anything that it doesn't include. And that's one of the attractions of it to me, because I'm a generalist. I like to look at the big picture, right? And the agricultural activities allow you to do that. Production activities allow you to do that. And it's the first occupation, and the first farmer was our Father, Lord God Almighty, right? He was also the first architect, the first designer, and so forth as well. First engineer, for those people who are in other fields of interest. So that Israel operated on a farming basis. The whole economy was farming. Most families had their farming units, and the entire farm family was part of the process, right? The cropping in the middle, in that part, you had the barley, which was harvested at Passover unleavened bread. You had the wheat, which was harvested at the Pentecost, or the Feast of Weeks. And you had the other fruits, the figs, the pomegranates, the grapes, the olives, which were harvested for the 7th month in terms of tabernacles. And the instruction that God said, don't come empty-handed, meant that each of these big ceremonies coincided with the reaping times. So it's almost impossible for you to be empty-handed, because you just harvest your barley, you just harvest your wheat, you just harvest your grapes and olives. So that God makes demands of us, but God also provides the resources and the wherewithal for us to do it. So in that system, people came during that time. So that is agricultural based. God is asking you now, every year you have your cycles, and the rainy season where we get the first rain and the latter rain. Those rainy periods coincided with, first of all, the planting activities for one set of crops, and then the planting activities for another set of crops. In our Antigua and Barbuda context, we have a wet season and a dry season. So that normally in the agricultural cycle, you prepare your land just before the rainy season comes, so that your land preparation is ready. And then when the rains come, you can start the cycle again, putting your plants and so forth. And by January to March, most of your produce will be harvested, right? So we have a rainy season and a dry season. That's our pattern. Palestine, Israel, where our storyline comes from in terms of Jesus' place of birth and place of work and place of crucifixion and resurrection and so forth. That's the cycle. And the families, most families, had their land-based activities. We go back a step when Joshua crossed the Jordan and they entering into the promised land after the liberation from Egyptian slavery. The entire area was divided among the 12 tribes. Well, they gave Joseph 2 tribes, and they reserved the Levites for the Lord. Okay, so Levi wasn't counted in the 12, but Manasseh and Ephraim were the 2 tribes from Joseph. That gave you 12. Each one had their space. The whole area was demarcated. Each one had their space, right? That was their patrimony, the inheritance of that tribe. And within that tribe, the different families had their subunits, but it was all agricultural. God comes up with a statement saying, you should have your production year after year, year 1, year 2, right down to year 6. And then he says, on year 7, you shouldn't engage in any work. My learning from reading it is that it would take a lot of faith to do that. Right? It would take a lot of faith for you to say, I'm not doing any work. Right? How am I going to eat? And the scripture also treats that issue because that's what, how we're going to eat. And God said, in the 6th year, I'm going to give you enough food to last 3 years. Okay? It's going to last the year of Jubilee, where you don't plant anything. It's going to last the first year of the next cycle, because in that year, you're going to plant, but you're not going to reap. So you have to have food for second year. And in the 9th year, right, then is when what you planted in the 8th year would be reaping, but until they reap that, you will still have food remaining for that period. That's a promise of God. It takes a lot of faith for you to operate on that promise. That's what I learned from the 7-year Sabbath. That's why major takeaway. I don't know if anybody else from the 70-year Sabbath situation have learned anything that they think is significant. Your time to talk. We have a runner. I will be double as a runner. Anybody from the 70-year Sabbath? Having read it here. What do you think about it? It's not normally talked about. It's one of those sections of the Bible that is kind of news to people, right?
Everybody was involved in this. The stranger, even your animals were involved in this cycle. Nobody was left out at all.
So normally in the harvesting, there was a rule that says when you reap your field, you should leave back the corners of it for the poor, for the stranger, etc., so they can gather. It's a commercial activity. Normally in our capitalist system, you try to reap everything. Not a grain you're leaving behind. You reap everything and all is yours. But in the Jewish economy, they suggested that you should leave the corners of your fields there so that other people can get something to eat. The poor among you, the strangers among you, etc. Right? And also, if things drop on the ground, you don't pick it up. You leave it there for the same reason. And when you're shaking your olive trees, you don't shake off everything and make it clean. You have to leave some there so somebody else can come and benefit. But in the sabbatical year, you left everything there so that whoever wanted, they can come. And you didn't do any regular reaping and storing in your barns. You too would eat from it, okay, as well as the wild beasts and everybody else, right? Any other learnings?
Good morning, everyone. What I want to know, do they still practice this in Israel?
You know, the traditions say that this is how the Talmud treats with it. They say, well, this particular land rest obtains only in the territory of Israel, not in any other place that people are. Okay? And to some extent, people practice it then. But they came up with all kind of creative solutions. One said, well, if you sell your farm to somebody for that year who is not a Jew, okay, you get the proceeds from selling it or leasing it, and you get your money for leasing it. They would continue cultivating it because this rule doesn't apply for them because they're not Jews, okay? And therefore, you will have your land cultivated. That was one solution that some people came up with, right? And they had other creative solutions of moving around. But we know in the scripture that Israel was put in exile. And the major reason that the scripture said was that they did not observe the land rest. For 490 years, from since they crossed Jordan, the land rest was not observed. They didn't have faith that God would provide for those years. They're not taking any chance. Okay, they're their own insurance, and therefore they're planting every year. And God said, since you had 70-year rest that occurred during that 490 years that you didn't observe, and you had all the freedom and all the luxury to observe it in great times and good times, but you refuse, well, you're going to be forced to observe 70 land rests, one after the other, in 70 years of captivity in Babylon. That sends a big message to me. it says that the land rests. They did all kind of other things, child sacrifice, worshiping Moloch, and all the other religions and so forth. But the issue that the scripture repeated again and again was that they did not observe the land rest for most of their 490 years.
The year of Jubilee is holy.
So I look at that and I say it's significant to God, and I pay attention to it, right? In terms of what God says is important for us to pay attention to it and to be not only hearers of the word, but doers also, right? I think I heard, yes.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. You have answered part one of my question. The young lady over there, she asked the first part. But my question, another part of my question is, since that we are not physical Jews, but we are spiritual Jews, is it something that we should incorporate when those who start farming should adopt that same principle?
Okay. We're not physical Jews. We're spiritual Jews. We are children of Abraham spiritually. That means all the advice to Abraham is relevant to us. That's why we observe the instructions of God in every aspect of our lives. Okay? Consequently, my view is that you look at our God's words and you incorporate all the things that God has said. In a situation where you have a theocracy, where you have a state that subscribes to that system of belief, and all the persons there are of one mind and is agricultural based, you could see how easy it is to implement it in that context. In any other context, it's going to require a lot of other things. But agriculturally, farming the same land again and again every year is not a good practice. It takes away all the nutrients of the land, and the land doesn't get to revive itself in terms of plant nutrients. Usually, the fallow period is usually less than 7 years, right? Several cropping systems come. You might divide your fields in 3, and at any point in time, one part is fallow, rejuvenating itself, and you're operating on the other 2 parts in terms of regular agricultural practices. That's how the fallow situation. But God is instructing specifically that I am your God. This is what I tell you to do. Then it's up to you whether you want to practice it or not, right? And you see the consequence in the Jewish economy when that was not done, right? The question was when it start, if you can start it anytime. And so before I had the land, it was rested. So now I'm starting from year one, and I count my own one. But that's an issue to be explored, because you look at in the Jewish tradition and the Jewish calendar, I think they're in year 5,000 and something now. They would have time set apart where the 7-year cycle repeats itself. So one could link up with that system if they feel like or not, right? Yes.
Yes, happy Sabbath, everyone. I think that what we can learn from it too is, like the sister was asking a question, if you start a farm, there is that opportunity to do that, just like you're talking about. If you have 3 plots of land or 3 areas that you could rest that area for a year. You could continue working on the others, and you do that so that when this one is ready you can rest another one, and you can do that so that the land really gets to recover, because God said it, because he know how he made the earth. And for the problem that we have in today in terms of what they call climate change has a lot to do with how we deal with the earth. And eventually God is going to give the earth 1,000 years rest. Just wanted it to sink in. 6,000 years, the earth is going to get 1,000 years. So it is really important if at the end God is going to give the earth 1,000 years rest, because that's the week in terms of the cycle that would take place. 6,000 years of work, 1,000 years the earth gets the rest. So I think it's critical for us to be able to apply all these rules or these principles to our lives. In everything that God does, there is a principle, and we can apply it, even though as a community we might not be able to, but as individuals, I think we have opportunity to do so.
Any other thoughts? Okay, I'm just going to jump over to the 50-year jubilee now.
You know, I see what he's saying, but when you look at the complete of what the commandment or order was, the land should be rested, also the workers. So if you were to divide up your land into 3 sections, you're working one and you have, or you're working 2 and you rest one for the 7th year. What of the workers? Are you going to dismiss them and get others? You know what I'm saying?
In the setup, the entire country was on lockdown for that year.
Yes, and personally, are you practicing it, or are you going to practice that and how it works?
The personal thing. That's why I study all these scriptures in the Bible. I have a project I'm looking at that have agricultural references. For example, with tree crops that bear over a long time, like olive trees, the instruction is, first year you don't reap anything, you allow it to drop on the ground. Second year, you allow it to drop on the ground. Third year, you allow it to drop on the ground. I think the 4th year, you bring it to God. And from the 5th or 6th year, then is when you start to harvest. Those are tree crops that have a long life. Okay? That's an instruction that is in the Bible. And that is something that, as I read it, I read the different things. I try to do as many things as I see. If I see it there, I try to do it. That is my my posture on it. But you know that the economy was grains, right? They're growing grains, they're growing fruits, etc. The question of the vegetable component is a different thing. Short-term things is a different thing, seasonings and so forth. So that you'd have to look at it from that point of view. But underlying the decisions is the question of, do I trust God enough to do this practice? That's how I see it in terms of that issue. The 50-year, okay. Over.
Yes, sir. The whole world is industrialized at this point in time. We're living in 2025. Now, how are we going to maybe get the world in order to maybe gravitate to these practices of the Bible? Because it seems sort of impossible at this point in time. Very, very impossible. Because most countries are producing maybe oil, bauxite, gold, diamond, and all these sort of things. They don't know about these practices. So how can we, as spiritual Jews, get the message across to them? They don't know. So they only do what they know based on their science.
Okay? So the whole world is here, but we're preparing for something called the rest on the first day of the week. Industrialized or not, we're going to implement this because it's going to do something about the climate. It's going to build families together. You'll have family time, but they're designated that that time should be the first day of the week. The whole world is going to conform. Okay? So the question, and we know the whole world conformed to something called COVID pandemic. All of them, industrialized or not, whatever their production base. But to go back further, the great countries in the world, agricultural base. The great America, agricultural base, still agricultural base, and it kills the agriculture of other countries so that its products would dominate the market. Still agricultural base, right? Europe, agricultural base, and even further, slave labor base, because they enslaved most of the world in order to make Europe great. Okay? I don't know if they're going to make Europe great again. I don't know what that means. But Europe was made great by the sweat and blood and the lands of Caribbean countries, of Latin America, of South America, etc. And also in Asia, etc. Right? But it funneled the agricultural economy. And agriculture is the basis for industrialization. Once you deal with agriculture, then you have even in the Jewish economy, olive, you have your olive oil, okay, which is dominant in a lot of the practices. It's an industrial project. Grapes, you have your wine presses and so forth, and all the products related to it. It's agricultural based, right? And similarly, all the grains, etc. One thing I noticed is that the grain economies in Antigua, when we talk about a farm, we talk about an area of land less than 5 acres. And we have a covenant or a restriction that say you can't put any buildings on it. But if you're really farming, you have to have a storehouse. Okay? You have to have a system where you're raping your things and you have your post-harvest technology where you have the storing methods so that the things can last from one planting season to the next. You have to have buildings and structures. In the Jewish economy, you'd have that. You'd see each farming unit had a whole complex that dealt with its food processing activities and storage and putting up so it doesn't deteriorate. Even Joseph in Egypt used that technology. So for 7 years, they had granaries that they can open one, deal with that. They go to the next one, deal with that, and no weevil, and so forth. The grain was solid and good when they're ready to deal with it. They had the technology of how to store it so they can release it to deal with the famine. Amen. And we too, in our technologies, need to do that. Some of them lend themselves to storage better than others. The root crops might have a better tolerance to going from one year to the next or for long periods of time, but they have a technology in terms of doing it. But it's part of being on the land. In agriculture in Antigua, they restrict that. They restrict residents on the agricultural land. They restrict buildings on the agricultural land because the philosophy was to keep the farmer's hand tied and to keep the farmer dependent. And our whole political culture in Antigua is to keep each one of us dependent. So we go to individuals who set themselves up as gods to dole out things to us as we come as mendicants begging. Mercy. Agriculture changes all that because you grow your food for yourself. And that surplus, you can either barter or you can sell in the marketplace and live an independent lifestyle. But in our Caribbean cultures, we want our populations to be dependent and docile. Therefore, in the whole Caribbean, agriculture has been depressed and it has been in the doghouse. Look at your budget, the lowest amount of money, agriculture. And even more recently, the agricultural program seemed to get 25,000 acres in Colombia to provide food security for us here, or to bring in Chinese and their technology to grow on the greenhouses, etc. And what of the local Antiguan and Barbudan farmer and family who have invested interest in the land? Okay? Is a philosophy of the question of dependence. But our economy right now is not like that. We are tourism in Antigua and Barbuda. We're not industry, because in the early 60s, they tried to link industry to agriculture. You had a strong cotton industry, you had a ginnery. That bring you up to one level. And then you can use the oil to produce cottonseed oil, to produce feed for animals, etc. We tried that. The people didn't like the taste of the oil, etc. But it was a question of education and improving your technology over time. Because what you would have is that you would producing your own cottonseed oil. You would have an industry starting with the agricultural production, moving to the factory, which we had, moving to the question of your oil as one unit, and the other unit is fiber, is what they call island cotton, which is one of the most expensive fibers. And you know, cotton is one of the natural products and is better. And we know there's a, God said don't mix the fabrics, right? A lot of us would be in trouble. But they're saying that the cotton is a fabric that when it's hot, it keeps you cool. When it's cool, it keeps you warm, naturally. And you have a fiber industry that spins over into fabric, clothes making, etc., would generate a lot of things. We had that at that time. But our vision was not in terms of our independence. We also had the, if you looked at other products that come from an agricultural base, that you can go downstream and get other things on that basis. But usually those practices don't lend themselves to corruption in terms of a farmer having $1 million to bring it in a brown paper bag or not and put it on your desk. Okay? They don't have that, right? But throughout the whole Caribbean, the culture of political persons seemed to be to use political positions to get rich quickly, rather than all of us rising together based on what our land produce and what our labor produce, and we share it together. Okay, we don't have that culture. And because of that, the agricultural enterprises do not generate enough millions that you can easily put it in somebody's pocket. Go to road construction. That generates millions. Because to do these roads, to lead it, they talk millions of doing it. And it's easy to slip in $1 million there, slip in $1 million there. Nobody miss it. Because heavy duty equipment and that production cycle is expensive, and we know that, and it involves millions, right? And therefore, that is more attractive, right? To deal with real estate. That's the other area of expansion in Antigua especially. You get a piece of land, you target the billionaires around the world, okay? On this one plot that you get, you might pay $1 million to get it. Then you subdivide it into 100 plots, and each of them pay 10 to 20, or even sometimes they say 50 million or more, and they buy it from you. So for 1 million, you walk away a billionaire out of that one deal. So the suggestion is that many people are moving into that as the way of how you use your land resource, right? So the question of agriculture, agricultural production, and even within Adventist circles, some people say when things get rough, they're going to have to run to the land. Okay? I recommend strongly that you go to the land from now so that you're producing your own food. You produce it without using toxic chemicals so that you're not jeopardizing your health, and you know exactly what is going into your body from now. And you practice it where you have a little thing, a little place on your porch, and you put some save and thyme and Spanish thyme or whatever little seasoning that you use, some mint and so forth. You can start at that level. And you can cooperate with others and operate at a different level. I think somebody wanted to put in a point.
You answered most of the things that I wanted to speak about. But you know, and going back into Ellen White, if all of us had listened to what he said, and the amount of Seventh-day Adventists we have in Antigua, we could control a whole lot of things, you know, because if we don't produce, you don't eat. And we could, you know, if we were to have banded together, I mean, Antigua, where can you run and hide? No, you can't run and hide anywhere. Because, you know, but in the meantime, if all of us had gathered together, worked together by what she said, what a better place it would be for us, because we really are not looking for millions. And so now, you know, we're looking for survival and spreading the word of God. That's the most important thing. And if we lose sight of that and we don't use the Bible principles, where are we going to spend eternity is the most important thing. We just we just learned we're on the edge of eternity.
On the Jubilee, the 50 year, you blow the shofar to announce it on the Day of Atonement. It starts the Jubilee year. Those who are enslaved are freed. Okay? Those who have sold their land because they fell in hard times, their land is restored. Okay? So it's a kind of reset. So all the 12 tribes, their land remained theirs forever and ever. And any kind of adjustments that took place in the time, every 50 years, it was reset. And even in the 7-year cycle, you would forgive the debts of your brothers and sisters that they owe you. And they get a restart also. Their debts are forgiven in the 7-year cycle. The same thing happens in the 50-year cycle, where persons who are enslaved would be freed. Those who had sold out their patrimony would get it back. So they get a chance to restart. Looking at it, I see the 50-year Jubilee, what I learned from it is something like the New Jerusalem in my mind, right? It's a celebration of resetting the earth back to Genesis 1 and 2, right? And the Jubilee is a celebration of that process, that we go back to how it was in the beginning and how God intended it to be. The paradise that he created for us, the place of pleasure for us to commune with him. That is my takeaway from it. And also I looked at the situation of Barbuda. And in Barbuda, they have a history of what you call communal land ownership. Codrington got a lease on Barbuda, 1 fat pig a year or something like that was his rent or lease to the crown. And then they organized it. And they had a tradition that each Barbudan family and each person who is born there will get a piece of land that they can put up their house. And usually they're building their house together, etc. I looked at this, and when I was reading it, I say, with all the industrialization and all that has taken place around the world, this looks like a society that could implement the 50-year Jubilee system of resetting. The only problem I see is that they're subdividing it too much. The Jewish system subdivided it according to 12 tribes, and it remained like that. And therefore, if you look at your major families and you subdivide it in those families, you would then end the cycle of breaking up, and then nothing leave. And then you'd set aside areas like your lagoon for the bird sanctuary, your natural areas that would replenish your systems. You can set up your parks, etc., as communal areas that everybody benefits from. But you have your areas dedicated according to families. And therefore, people wouldn't come and say, what? Pristine land. Let me make an apartheid down here. Push the Barbudans in that corner, have a buffer zone, and keep them away from all your billion-dollar homes and so forth that you're producing. That's our reality right now. But I think the idea, what is it, in our land tenure system, although we are based on private property under capitalism, that's how it is, people want to have their own, they also have a system of lease for 99 years. So that the 50-year thing is like a 50-year lease. That after 50 years, it comes back again. You can either renegotiate or whatever, but it comes back to the legitimate owners and is not alienated from you forever and ever. And that is what I like about that idea of the 50-year Jubilee, right? I don't know if anybody had any other thoughts about it.
How many acres of land over at Gilsbert Estate? Just lying down wasting. And we have so much farmers in the Adventist body. And we during COVID time, I suggested to one of the pastors, why don't we cut it up and give each district a piece and let them work it? When a lot of people were home not doing anything. If they had took up that vision and run with it by now, we would have so much cultivation. It's just we just have all the land of Gilbert Estate just languishing away. Nothing is on it. Absolutely nothing.
That might be difficult to achieve when you look at big pictures, but I suggest you get with somebody else who is farming, and between the two of you, you have a land-hand system, a lift system, a land-hand system, And you can start getting the benefits of it right now without having to get any conference decision, any other board, and any other things, right? Work among yourselves with like-minded people, and you could have some of that food security, some of that experience of a community. What is a community if it doesn't care about you and me? What is a community if we don't do anything together? What is a community if we're not looking out for each other? And together we are rising both in terms of our spiritual walk with God and also with surviving at this time, right? What is a community if we don't have these things, right? And that is the, but my idea is that start with those close to you and start with a few and help to learn each other and build confidence together so you know it's not any con artist and rip-off person, okay, so that you can entrust resources and so forth, and nobody's going to run off with it, because we live in a wicked world. The heart of men are desperately wicked, and therefore we have to be wise. And the wisdom is this: you prove people over time as to their trustworthiness. When they prove themselves trustworthy, you give them more to work with, okay? And you cannot give them the crown jewels as soon as they turn up, okay? So that you build trust, and with the basic of trust over time, you can then entrust more, you can disclose more, you can be closer together. But you have to spend a lot of time together facing what I call wheel and woe, facing good times and bad times, especially pressure, because under pressure is when the true character comes out. You see those who jump ship and those who are there for the long haul. But it takes a little time, and you have to invest it in the relationship and spending time in different circumstances with people to see really what they're made of. That's the method of God. God say, I'm sending you through this because I want to see if you truly love me, or if you just love what I give you, right? You're in it for the loaves and fishes? Or you're convinced that I am the God who made you, that love you, that will provide for you? You have to show that you trust God. That is a challenge we have. And in our relations with each other, we have to use some of those God methods, right? And we have to be wise, right? But we can start now, we can start today, we can start with the people who we're closest to and see what it is we can do to help each other to live a better life within that context, and use as much of the Bible and so forth, the things that we read, we see how it is we can incorporate it in our daily lives. Thanks a lot.